The following webinar was recorded as part of the original implementation of IWISH and has been made available for informational purposes only. Some portions of the original recording have been cut to ensure participants' privacy. References to the Lewin Group, implementation team, site liaisons, PHL, Google Drive, and some forms are not applicable to the demonstration extension effective October 1st, 2020. Terms and conditions of grantee's cooperative agreement supersede any information presented here. Please see the IWISH Operations Manual for the most up-to-date implementation information.
All right, good afternoon everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our training today. We'll be talking about ongoing support. So today, as we go through our slides, we would like to give you an understanding of the role that you'll provide in terms of connecting your IWISH participants to social and health service support. Additionally, we would like to help you get a better understanding about your role in terms of providing coordination to your residents. So most of your residents may have a coordinator through their primary care provider or maybe a nursing home facility that they've visited, and so we want to give you a better understanding of how you fit into all the different coordination efforts. And then finally, we want to share with you some tips that you can use to help your IWISH participants prepare for upcoming medical appointments. Next slide. So we'll be sharing a lot of information. There's going to be a lot that Walter will share and that I will share. And so to help you kind of process the information and pick what is most valuable to you in your particular site, I want you to think about the following two questions. What is my role in supporting an IWISH participant across settings? So whether you're a resident wellness director or a wellness nurse, what is it that is your responsibility, your role in helping your residents meet their goals? And then also think, how can I support participants in addressing current health challenges and ones that arise during the demonstration? Next slide. Next slide. So I know that enrollment just started yesterday. I know that many of you are excited for your residents to have officially launched the IWISH and get your residents to sign the consent form and officially enroll. But I want you for just a moment to kind of fast forward a couple weeks from now. So you've completed enrollment, you've completed the assessment, and you sat down with your resident and talked about some of the things that you've highlighted in their assessment, and they've kind of made their goals. So they have their IHAP. We talked about the IHAP, the Individual Healthy Aging Plan, in November. And so you've just completed the IHAP, and so now you got to think, what's next? What is it that you as a resident wellness director or a wellness nurse can do to support your resident in reaching their IHAP goals? How do you connect them to social and health services that they need to achieve the goals that they have set out?
Thanks, Joy. Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. I miss seeing all of you in person in D.C. We were just talking earlier how it was kind of nice to get together in person. I wish we would always be sent somewhere so we can spend time together. But the webinar is what we have to work with. So first of all, I hope you're all pretty comfortable, not so comfortable that you'll fall asleep, but comfortable because webinars are not everybody's favorite method of receiving information. So let's just do the best that we can with it. You know, maybe take a moment to think about your body. Are you comfortably sitting? Are you reclining? Are you sharing the webinar with another coworker? Who knows? So just, you know, settle in. And I know in DC, I used to start with some sort of a fun fact. I have no more fun facts still, but some of you may have heard, this is really interesting to me, on Sunday, a self-driving car from Uber ran over and killed a pedestrian. So it's a self-driving car. And this really made me wonder about the impact that self-driving cars would have on so many things, especially in healthcare, though, especially for our older adult clients. I mean, it's a whole new world. Very, very interesting. So I've been thinking a lot about that today. Anyway, but I digress a little bit. Let's dive in. So next slide, please. So what is the IHAP? You've already discussed all of this previously, but I think it bears mentioning again that the IHAP really lays out a path for addressing the participants' interests and needs that were identified in the person-centered interview and the assessment. That's pretty straightforward. You've done the interview, you've done the assessment. Now let's put it all together. So this will include specific goals and needs to work on, and these will have a work plan and a timeline. It's really important, the fact that there's a plan and a timeline. And the other important thing to mention here is that it's the participant perspective that guides the goals in the work plan. I know we've mentioned this so many times, but this work is very much patient-centered, it's client-centered, it's client-focused. We may have our ideas of what's good for our clients and residents, but they have their own ideas. They are the experts in their own care, and our job is very much to merge those two worlds. So the nature of the goals and work plan will vary, of course, therefore, based on interests, health, functional social circumstances, the existing services and support network. So that's a lot of words to basically say this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all plan, and that means that it's all of your tasks to make them unique and specific to the person you're working with. Next slide, please. So for many in the past, this has been some of the most enjoyable aspects of their job, because this is when you actually, that's where the rubber meets the road and you're getting going. But the process is, as you all are familiar with by now, and it's so exciting that you're already getting going, is you begin with the interview, then you have the wellness assessment, then you meet with participants to individualize the plan, and then then you meet together with the resident wellness director and the wellness nurse, draft the plan, prepare it, and then you meet with the participant to individualize it. So this is a really key component, is that the plan, you may well come up with it, but then it really has to be made something that the resident is interested in and agrees in and wants to work on. Next slide, please. All right, this is probably redundant, but I think it's sort of important to put yourself in the mindset of what's happening here. So the plan is completed, and I think the next step that often gets missed out, that's in my mind one of the most challenging aspects of this entire process, and something we'll go into a little bit deeper at a later section, is you want to understand your role in supporting the residents. Because very few of you, probably none of you, are really going to be working in isolation. And I'm not just talking about the wellness nurse and the resident wellness directors. I'm talking about so many of the other entities that are outside of the residents, that are even outside of the hospital, the PCP, that exist out in the community all around you. And each of these entities may well have some sort of a care management component. They may have other people that are having similar conversation with your residents. So putting yourself in the middle of all of this activity is really important. You really have to understand that you're not working alone. So we'll kind of get to that later. And then it's once you understand your role that you can then move on to really intelligently implementing the plan, which is the next step. All right, next slide, please. All right, so by way of refresher, so wellness directors, of course, are driving the process. Wellness nurses are collaborating, and we're building on everything we've learned from the assessment and the interview. Each plan should include goal or goals, and it's okay if there's only one. As we'll talk about later, or really just right here, less is more a lot of times. So it would include goals to work towards, specific actions to achieve the goals, and understanding who is responsible. So who is going to do which aspect, perform what aspect of the goal, and what is the timeline. The expectations have to be really, truly realistic. So we're focusing on 2 or 3 goals at once, no more, and simple action steps are good. You want to discuss the nature also and the extent of the support that you're getting from the program. And there was a client that I worked with, a mentally ill adult, who he had schizophrenia. He was very afraid of going outside of his house. So the only time he really would venture out is either with his very aging parents, either mom or dad, who he lived with, and they were both in their 70s or 80s. And they had a lot of frail issues themselves, or with me, or another one of his care managers. There was a team of us. So my plan with him, our plan with him was, and it took about, I'm not even kidding, about a year to implement, where on his own, starting with once a week, he would go and check the mail on his own. No supports, nobody there with him. He would actually walk outside on his own, open the door, close it, walk to the end of the driveway, get his mail, and come back. And this was a huge victory for him, and it took months. But believe it or not, that really small step ended up really breaking the ice for him. You know, you can imagine that achieving something so simple that may have been just unattainably frightening as a thing to do before was a huge victory, and he felt a lot more empowered. And then it made it easier to go after sort of bigger things. So truly, less is more. Next slide, please. All right, so the resident wellness director and the wellness nurse will each fulfill their respective tasks and activities identified in the Healthy Aging Plan and will respond to new issues according to their respective skill set and capacity. So that should be pretty straightforward. And the intensity, of course, will then vary by participant need. And for some folks, you'll notice they're going to need a lot of hand-holding going on there. And for some, they don't really need it. So I think our challenge then comes with that first bullet point, the intensity piece. This is a really tough thing. It probably sounds pretty straightforward, but in fact, knowing how much to step in, how much to hold someone's hand is really, really tough. So you really have to be present. A lot of the discussions we had previously at this webinar and then in DC had to do with how do you bring yourself to a mindset where you don't really have preconceived notions, you're not really bringing any of your own baggage with yourself, but it's just you and the client. And so that's the kind of skill set that it takes here to understand maybe I need to do a little less in this case. Or maybe in this case, even though the client maybe seems a little bit distant, I actually need to figure out how to step in and do a little bit more than I ever have in the past. Okay, next slide, please. So the supporting the IHAP and other participant needs can include regular touch bases with the participant. So that really seems to make sense. Light coordination of social and health services. And light is maybe the key here. You are not going to be able, given your workloads, to be a really hands-on full care coordinator by any means. And you're coordinating just some aspects of the many services that this person is receiving, which goes back to my comment that you're very likely not alone. There are probably other care managers involved, and so knowing what they're doing is really going to be helpful. You're going to be focusing on educational and group programming, and we'll talk about some of these issues later as well. So we're going to be, you'll update the IHAP after annual reassessments or when the participant requests to change or add a goal. That's wonderful. You want this document to be living and breathing. So in other words, if something is not working, you should tweak it. So this really needs to be responsive to where the resident is thinking, where the resident's head is at, so to speak. Next slide, please. All right. It can be a little overwhelming if you for a second think of all the other entities that you might be intersecting with. Of course, healthcare. So healthcare is probably your primary focus here. We are trying overall to merge health and human services sort of together, if you will. And the healthcare members, first and foremost, primary care specialists. For many patients, we've discussed this before, but for many patients, particularly those with a lot of functional and chronic issues, some of their specialists may in fact play the role of the PCP for them. So that's really something to keep in mind. Home health agency, many individuals will have home health involvement. Hospital case workers. So here in particular, we're thinking about case managers when somebody stayed at a hospital overnight. They had an inpatient stay, and frequently those caseworkers will call and follow up, and sometimes they do from the emergency room as well. And other care coordinators. So this absolutely includes mental health services, but I would say that of all the other care coordinators, other than AAAs, which we'll get to in a second, the care coordination that may be provided by the primary or primary or specialty care is the thing you have to be aware of the most. Across the country, in many settings, primary care is really emerging as sort of the focal point of longitudinal care management activity, which means that a primary care physician out there, sometimes a specialist, but often primary care physician will think, all right, Mrs. Jones is my patient. I want to make sure that I have a social worker on my team that will connect with her consistently. So now if you switch your perspective for a second to this social worker and understand that it's important for him or her to also understand your role and vice versa. This is either an opportunity for a lot of confusion or an excellent opportunity to team up and work together around something. So you may often have a situation where you're actually talking to one of the care coordinators as you're doing some of your light coordination. Moving on to area agencies on aging. So this will vary kind of significantly. No, sorry, still the old slide, but second bullet, area agencies on aging. And there's a great variability in how AAAs operate across the country. Some of you may have a really robust, strong AAA in your area. And so there's going to be variability in terms of the kind of classes, workshops they're providing, and what kind of case management or care coordination they're providing as well. I am familiar with a number of AAAs that actually have a dedicated case manager that your residents may be assigned to. They may not even know your residents that they're assigned to this case manager, and they may hear from the case manager proactively. So this is something else that's really important. Now, since healthcare tends to be much more episodic and occasional than community-based care, the AAA care managers, if they are involved, may end up being very good partners for you as well. But there are also many other types of community-based organizations. It's not just about the AAAs. You can have, for example, Asian community service centers, mental health centers. There's a number of faith-based organizations which are very robust and provide incredible care, as well as youth organizations, transportation companies, libraries, durable medical equipment providers, pharmacies. There are a lot of these entities out there. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed. Most of them will not have other care managers that are stepping on your toes in any way. So to separate the signal from the noise, so to speak, I recommend that you focus on healthcare, especially PCPs, and on AAAs. So I think those are your best potential partners out there. Next slide, please. So now you have the IHAP. You've agreed on what needs to take place. You even have a good sense of who is around you that can help from other entities. How are you sort of going to handle the workload back at the ranch? So one important thing is having regular team meetings. So at these meetings, you're going to review identified participants and discuss their needs. Then you're going to discuss potential solutions to address the needs, plan responsive steps, and you have continuous communication as needed. So we should pause here for just a brief moment that as you're having these meetings, I would really encourage you to discuss your own team process. We talked about this in DC. We had a lot of fun activities, but don't sort of forget that content and just think about what's working for you. All right, we've had so much prep, so much anticipation of this program. Now that it's here, and we're finally sitting down, maybe some of you are sitting down for your first meetings right as we speak. So think about what works for you. What kind of communication strategies work for you? What kind of feedback do you want to get from one another? Because as you're starting sort of a new team, or perhaps an old team, but in this new way of being a team, you know, you could really, it's a great opportunity to potentially think about how do you even collaborate even better than you have in the past. So it's a really exciting time, a lot of opportunity for change. And then you have the PHL data platform. I keep forgetting what that stands for, Population Health Logistics, I think. So the platform could be very useful as well. So you can review the platform together and identify needs that arise for each participant. It can help you exchange follow-up notes, super helpful. Monitor the team members' engagement with participants, and celebrate achievement of goals, because you're going to have that, and that's a really key thing to do. You've got to have celebrations and mini victories. All right, next slide, please. Here's Here's a little picture of the database that you should be familiar with. All right, so the term that we're using today that Joy started us off with is social and health services coordination. There's a lot there. So it's your job to provide social and health services coordination in support of the IHAP. Easily the coolest part of what we get to do. This is where we actually get to do what this program is meant to do. The trick is that we're filling in gaps and we're not duplicating services. So that I was mentioning earlier about seeing who else is involved in care is really key here. When I may have mentioned to you in DC that I do some training around a transitional care model called the bridge model of transitional care, and the whole point of that model when we were first starting it was really to not duplicate services. In other words, someone is discharged from the hospital, they go home, and they may already be getting support from their caregivers, from their primary care physician specialists, all those other organizations that I talked about before. And can you imagine if you're the patient, you just got home, and you're getting a call from your primary care physician, from the hospital, from some other program? It's really annoying. It's really annoying, and it's really disengaging. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was a pretty funny article in the Wall Street Journal that was called Coordinating the Coordinators. It's an actual challenge in a healthcare system. Sometimes people don't have any supports or very poor supports, and sometimes there's too many. And so our job with coordination is to be able to balance all of this and be always patient-centered and focused. So my go-to whenever I have a client that I'm working with, my go-to is not to think first, what do I think would be appropriate for this person? I mean, I probably immediately have some thoughts on this, but it's more like, if I was this individual going home, what would I like to see? So if I'm coming home and I have some mobility challenges, or I was told by the doctor that I need to look at my diet, what would I like to do? I may not be able to cook well, so I need to find out some good recipes, or so I don't have any good recipes, so I need to find some recipes. I might have assistive equipment, etc. So it's sort of that mindset that's really helpful here. And some examples of the coordination activities include establishing accountability and agreeing in responsibility, easily the most important thing. Communicating and sharing knowledge. And so who are those first two dashes talking about? It's talking about you. And then you find out that the person has, let's say, a AAA care manager and a nurse from the PCP's office that's calling them. To me, awesome. You have a team. That team doesn't know that it's a team, but you can make them act like a team. And all of the communication techniques we discussed in the past about being open-ended and being a good listener, all of those, it's equally as important to follow all of that with the other coordinators and other providers as it is with the clients. Because we've all had experiences that when we call someone else involved in the care, and maybe they're not super nice. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they're burned out. Who knows? And here's a chance for us to either continue this kind of negative interaction, which ultimately will trickle down by not providing the client with what they need, or we can sort of turn it around a little bit and figure out how do we actually work together well. So as we're establishing accountability and responsibility and just creating this role clarity, and as we're sharing what we know, I really hope that we're all thinking about how do we do this collaboratively, which is basically another way of saying how can we just be really nice to one another, because ultimately we have the same goal. We have this patient, client, resident who we want to get better. We're helping with transitions of care. We'll talk about transitions in an upcoming webinar, but for now, transitions really refers to any change in care setting. So it could be when somebody's even coming back from the primary care physician's office and back home, that's a transition. From the ED up to the inpatient stay, that's a transition. Discharge from the hospital and coming back home, that's a transition. Each time there's a transition, there's also very often a change in things like medication, problem lists, discharge, the plan of care. So helping with transitions means paying attention to those issues that come up. We're assessing participant needs and goals, of course. That's sort of an ongoing process. Creating, therefore, proactive IHAP. Responding to changes in participant needs by connecting to social and health services, as we discussed previously. Supporting their self-management goals. That's really critical. I always think if I go away tomorrow, if I'm fired tomorrow, or if I win the lottery, if I win the lottery, I'll probably stick around to finish the case, but then I'm gone. But if I leave tomorrow for some reason and the client no longer has me, are they more capable now to take care of themselves than they were with me in the picture? That's a really important question. There's a big tendency for us to do for our clients and residents rather than doing with them or empowering them to do on their own. It's a big difference there. Linking to community resources, of course, and working to align those resources with the needs of the participant and the property too. So I love how some of you were thinking beyond just the immediate resident needs, and you're thinking, well, maybe others can really benefit from, let's say, exercise classes or something like that. That's really great. Next slide, please. So as we were discussing some of the other types of coordinators the participants might have. Wait, I don't think my slide changed. Did it change for others?
We're on the what coordinators might participants already have slide.
Nice. Okay, mine as last time did not change yet, so I'm just going to go off my notes, and I'll let you know when it catches up. So what other coordinators might participants have? Certainly their care coordinator from their primary care team. I mentioned this before. This is your most likely partner. Support from a community-based organization, usually a AAA, is your second most likely partner. Coordinator from a hospital discharge team, frankly, probably not. Still, by and large, not. That doesn't happen that often. They're way too busy thinking about what's going on in the unit. And sometimes you might have a SNF nurse or someone or a social worker follow up with you, but really it's those first two bullet points. Now, very interesting opportunities for those that are either dually eligible, they have Medicare Advantage, they could have any sort of managed care entity involved with them. Many of these entities have coordinators that are part of them. Usually they don't do a ton. In fact, they usually do very little. However, they do some things, and so knowing what they're able to help with can actually help you a great deal. You probably won't be able to rely on them to carry a ton of weight, but some focus on specific sets of services, very often transportation, for example. Next slide, please. So I'm moving on to the role. Is that what everyone is seeing right now? I'm still.
Yep.
I'm gonna try maybe logging off, and logging back in. Anyway, I'm gonna fix my computer issue and keep going from paper. So the role is going to vary, and that just makes sense. You're not just going to say, I'm only doing this and you only do that. In some situations, you might help one another to help to take care of something. But it certainly can include activities such as giving participant information about an organization or service, offering to call the organization together with them. That's a really great way to work on self-efficacy, doing something with them. Regular check-ins. It doesn't have to be formal. If you're running into someone in the hallway or in some common room, that's perfect. That's even better. It doesn't have to be like a thing, you know. It could really feel a lot more organic, your relationship. Answering questions from them or their family, and involving them in the community healthy aging plan events, which is really a great opportunity as well. Let's keep going. Next slide talks about some other roles. You may also be advocating with the need for participants if there's long wait list or needed service or they can't get a doctor's appointment. So this is, I found, very helpful and a little bit surprising. So I have had a number of situations where clients are advocating for themselves. They're calling the office, do you have an earlier appointment for me? And they're saying, nope, no, this is it. You have to wait 3 weeks. And maybe it's because there's some heft attached to an organization calling on behalf of a client. Maybe it's some other persuasive method that seems to have developed over time. But for some reason, we get a lot more, all right, we'll squeeze them in, than the patients do. So I wouldn't always take the participant's word for it if they're having trouble getting in. I might call myself to double check. Not everybody's favorite, but certainly helping to apply for benefits, filling out forms. I think this was mentioned in the chat earlier, and that's very appropriate. Arrange for transportation and pickup, looking for free and discounted programs or resources. So this could really help with some nutritional aspects, but also medication. There are a lot of free or discounted medication programs out there. You know, the Walmart, CVS, Target, many of them have these generic medications that are for a lot cheaper than if you would get them just through your normal pharmacy. All right, and helping participants to prepare going to an event, starting a new program, or an upcoming doctor's appointment that they could be nervous about. This is really big, and I would connect this to our sort of social isolation discussion from last time, and we'll talk a little bit more about preparing for a doctor's appointment later in this webinar, but you are their support system. And especially for someone who's been isolated and they're really nervous about joining some activity, talk to them about what would make it easier for them. It's such a big deal to have someone that's on your side that's not going to leave you stranded. To me, sometimes I think about this as if I'm going to maybe a work event or to some get-together with friends that I don't know as well, or acquaintances. It'd be really nice if I had someone that I trust, that I know has my back by my side, at least in the beginning, just to get me comfortable and situated. It's really the same thing. All right, and we're going to finish off the section, next slide please, with the wellness nurse specific role. Of course, it's going to include following up after the doctor appointment. Huge. It's so nice to be able to come home after an appointment, which is often confusing even in the best of situations, and have a nurse to run some of that information by. Connecting with resources to support better chronic care management. Some of you mentioned potentially having chronic disease management programs or diabetes self-management programs on site. That'd be great. Help identify resources to support better medication management. And for those of you that are familiar, the medication management and appropriate adherence is the #1 issue that's related to people coming back to the hospital. So it's really critical. Support communication with physician or other healthcare providers around needs or concerns, and advise about health conditions. And I'll just briefly mention that in my 50-some person, largely social work department, we recently had a nurse that was hired, and she's the only nurse with about 35, 40 social workers and several public health folks around her. It was a heck of a culture change for all of us. But one thing, and there's so many stories around that of course I'm not going to get into today, maybe some other time, but I have to tell you it's been so helpful to have her call and advocate on behalf of a patient rather than a social worker, not necessarily because nurses are listened to sometimes more than social workers, which sadly is the case in many situations, but because in our case she was able to speak with the medical background about a specific thing that the nurse on the receiving end can really sort of right away resonate with. So we're not translating from symptoms to plan of care and medications. All right, so I'm going to pause here. I'm going to try to fix whatever's going on with my WebEx, and I believe we have a chat coming up. So, as I said before, we have an opportunity as we're interacting with other entities to engage them more in healthcare. And so, of course, the first step here is the participants themselves. So they're able to, and they should, discuss their goals and concerns with their primary care provider. They need to keep the primary care provider in the loop and other specialists as appropriate. But we can also talk directly with the primary care team with participant permission. And especially this can be helpful with some of the more sensitive topics such as alcohol consumption, fear of falling, incontinence, sexuality, memory, all sorts of issues like that. Next slide, please. So here's a few examples of some of the more sensitive topics. So for example, you're discussing alcohol consumption. You can say something like, or you can ask the participant to consider using something like, lately I've been wanting to have a drink earlier and earlier in the afternoon, and I find it's getting harder to stop after just one or two. What kind of treatments could help with this? It's really nice. You know, the person isn't really saying, I'm an alcoholic or I have a problem. What they're doing is they're reflecting on a trend that they're seeing that's starting to sort of give them a little bit of a pause, and you're asking for advice. It's very different from asking for help when you're really struggling, and I sort of like that frame. And I would encourage you, you know, in the interest of time, I think I will move along, but I would encourage you to review some of the other language here and see what really works for you. Okay, I think we have another quick chat.
We do, and so because of time, I'll say the question and allow you all to type into chat, but we'll keep moving. So the question is, what are some things you do or have done to help residents prepare for doctor's appointments or planned hospitalizations? So I know that many of you all have been working with older adults for years, or you've been a service coordinator for some time, and so there may be some things that you have already done to prepare residents for doctor's appointments, to empower them, help them to kind of frame and organize their thoughts and their concerns they want to present to their provider. So type into the chat some things that you do currently in your role or have done in the previous role to help residents prepare for doctor's appointments or planned hospitalization. Walter, while they're typing into chat, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you. All right, we're in the final stretch, and so we're going to look at some really hot ticket items. The first one being, how do you prepare for the doctor's appointment? And I'm sure what you're typing in right now, and I see some comments coming in, whatever has worked for you in the past, keep doing it. It's really great. But I can't emphasize enough this step in it, because we can do so much with social services. We have a lot of that under control. What we don't have as much under control is what happens with that doctor's appointment. And I have been to doctor's appointments with clients where all I could do was just laugh, because as I'm walking in, and I have at least a few patients I'm thinking about in particular, I'm walking in with a person who just earlier that day on the phone, or maybe in the previous day, shared some specific things they're really concerned about. Then they walk into the office, and the doctor says, how have you been? And they say, oh, great, doc, everything is great. Thank you for asking. It's like this knee-jerk reaction where we don't dive into what we actually want. This actually, this has been studied, and it's a little bit more true in older adults who don't want to be seen as complainers. And there's so many other reasons why people don't bring up challenges, such as maybe they're worried about, you know, their resident, like the safety of their residents. Are they going to be taken? Are they going to be forced to go to a SNF or something like that? So preparing for an appointment is critical, and it's pretty straightforward. So first, make a list of concerns, any new symptoms, shots, etc. Prioritize and have that list and bring it with you. So take the information with you to the appointment, including a list of medications, any insurance cards, and documentations. You don't want to waste time at the doctor's office looking for that stuff. Next slide, please. Whenever possible, it would be great to bring a family member or a friend, someone that can play backup. Make sure you can see and hear as well as possible. And that means speaking up and sometimes saying things like, you know, my hearing makes it hard to understand everything you're saying. It helps a lot when you speak slowly, something like that. And don't forget about including interpreter services or any additional lenses, eyewear that could be helpful. And provide an update on what's new since your last visit. The doctors don't know everything, and so all they know is what's on the chart in front of them and anything that may have been communicated to them by one of you in the time being. So chances are they don't really know what happened. So fill them in, and that's really important. It's really part of self-advocacy. Next slide. And there's some great tools out there online. I think Joy and the team will share the links with all of you, but the National Institute on Aging has a great deal of resources that can help on how do you actually talk with your doctor successfully. Next slide, please. All right. Joy?
Yes. I was waiting, the thing seems to have frozen. So we want to, again, hear from you, thinking about making progress. And so think about maybe a New Year's resolution that you have made, maybe this year and in previous years. Maybe it was to better manage your weight, get a new job, save money, quit smoking. What helped you to be successful? So when you set your New Year's resolution, are there some things that you kind of also set in place to help you achieve those goals? We want you to enter that into chat. And if for some reason you were not successful with those goals, share in chat reasons that you think you were not successful.
Should I
give you about 30 seconds to respond to that,
okay.
And then I'll throw it back to you, Walter.
Thank you. Although I will say what's really helped me with New Year's resolutions is you got to work on the resolution itself. Like my resolution this year was to eat a lot more fast food. I've been knocking it out of the park. Been really good with it. Just had some McDonald's earlier today.
Yeah, I think when I set New Year's resolutions, what helps me be successful is breaking it down into smaller steps. So things that I might need to do on a daily basis or weekly basis in order to achieve the goal.
This is kind of neither here nor there, but as the comments are coming in, I heard an interesting take on the whole resolution concept earlier this year. It was a declaration, and so you sort of put a word out there that you want to take with you throughout the year, and it could be trust, it could be love, it could be support, and it's something that it's not a specific thing that you're expecting yourself to do, but maybe it's like an idea, an emotion that you really want to focus on. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. All right, so...
You can go ahead and move on, Walter.
Thank you.
I'll monitor the chat to see what responses come in.
I've been looking at some of the responses. They're really terrific. I love helping others work on the goal with you and having the same goal. That's really great, too. But all of us, I'm sure, have been faced with situations where no progress is being made on our own goals or in the goals of our clients. So I think just a quick sort of check of the symptoms. Did other things become more pressing? Is the participant still on board? And was it a good goal? Goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. That's absolutely true, because if any one of those is missing, it's just a little bit too easy to have an out. So next slide, please. And this is where we come back to our old friend ORS and the darn C that some of you might remember. So ORS is, as we discussed before, just a good way to have a conversation, a good way to communicate. Darn C, on the other hand, is a great way to explore the desire to change. Is there desire? Is there ability? Does this person have good reasons to change? Does they need to change? And can we get the commitment? Many of you appropriately pointed out that sometimes our clients don't have the same goals as us. And so this is when we use these tools to have the conversation about how do we create goals that are both good for them, but also, in our eyes, healthful for them and helpful. And let's not forget, before I turn it back over to Joy, next slide please, that this is not a linear process for any of us. I challenge any of you to think of a single goal that you just started going towards it, and you just made it in one go with no deviation plan. I have a feeling we all took slight detours. We all had to adjust. And so the stages of change cycle is very helpful here. Before this started with substance abuse, but it's really relevant to any decision, any change. Sometimes we're pre-contemplation. We have no intention of changing. Then we start thinking about it. It's contemplation. Then we're preparing to make the change. We take action. We maintain. We hold onto the gains we've made. And then, as so often happens with so many of us, we relapse. And maybe we don't want to think about it again. And it's a cycle. And our clients and our residents are on that cycle just as we are. And the one helpful thing to me is to remember it's not a circle, it's a spiral. And hopefully it's an upwards moving spiral with your help. And so even if someone relapsed, to get to contemplation, again, is going to be easier each time around. So I hope you stick with it, you keep adjusting the IHAP, and we keep moving forward, which is really what this project is all about. All right, thanks everyone for your time. Joy, I'm handing it back to you.
Thank you so much, Walter. So I want to share about some upcoming events. As you know, we are close to the end of our time, but some quick next steps. Continue to identify some potential resources for referral and programming. Last week Nancy shared with us about partnerships and building different external partnerships to support your IWISH participants. So if you haven't already, please take a look at the partnership guide and begin to work through and identify and prepare to meet with potential partners and talk about your communication mechanisms between the resident wellness director and the wellness nurse. And of course, continue using PHL and practicing. There is a session tomorrow, I believe, at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock. No, Thursday, I apologize. Thursday at 3 o'clock we have PHL office hours, so please join us for that.